Hello, hello, hello. This is Gresh from the I Am CEO podcast, and I have a very special guest on the show today. I have Brian Rollo of BrianRollo.com. Brian, it's awesome to have you on the show.
Gresh, I am so excited to be here. I've been looking forward to this for a while, so glad we finally got to talk.
Absolutely. The day is finally here. I'm super excited to have you on. And before we jumped in, I wanted to read a little bit more about Brian so you can hear about all the awesome things that he's doing. And Brian is the leading expert on using the habits of influential leadership to build high performing organizational cultures, unleash the potential of employees, and reduce executive stress. Brian has used his powerful frameworks in his process to help hundreds of managers become influential leaders. He is also the acclaimed author of the 10 Habits of Influential Leadership. Brian, are you ready to speak to the IMCO community?
I am ready. Thank you so much. Let's go.
Let's do it then. So to kind of kick everything off, I wanted to hear how everything got started. Could you take us through what I call your CEO story? We'll let you get started with all the awesome work you're doing.
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to give you the shorter version of it. But the shortest version is I found myself in a comfortable position in corporate life. I was the training director for a mid-sized financial services organization, um, responsible for all sorts of training for a lot of people. And over the course of several years, I developed a leadership development program and was able to put hundreds of the company's managers through there. And that became to be my passion. Like, of all the things I did, that was the part that really I gained fulfillment from. To see somebody go from struggling or maybe even too new not to know that they were struggling, but they were, and to help them become influential leaders and to be able to create results from people became really the most fulfilling thing that I could do. Because I got to see not only how much I could make their lives better, because when you're a struggling leader, you don't sleep, right?
Right.
When your team is not performing and you know that's all on your shoulders, life is bad. You're looking over your shoulder, wondering if you're the next to go, wondering why you're not meeting goals. That is painful. And it's usually painful for the people around you. So, like, when I could help people make that shift, and then I would notice a huge ripple effect because, like, their teams would become happier. Once they got better, it would expand to those teams. And then, like, when they went home, their families were happier because they were happier at work. There was almost like no end to the ripple effects when I could make that change. So that came to be my passion. And after several years of doing that, I got to see what really works and what doesn't work. And I decided to say goodbye to corporate life. As much as I loved the company I worked for and loved the job I had, I felt like sort of a mission to go and take that to the rest of the world. So that's what I do.
Nice. I absolutely love and appreciate that because I think so many times, we of course get excitement from, reaching goals ourselves, but I almost feel like, as you said, like when you get the opportunity to maybe, I guess, empower somebody that maybe doesn't even maybe feel it within themselves, that's definitely one of the more exciting things that we get to do as leaders and in our lives.
Yeah, and we've all had that bad boss, probably, Gresh. If
Mhm.
somebody can't relate to that, you're very lucky. Most of us can. But like, I found nobody starts out wanting to be a bad boss, Gresh. Like, they don't say, I'm going to come in and be as evil as I can, right? They just don't have the skills and they get caught up in doing things the wrong way, maybe the way somebody else showed them. And before they know it, like, they're enemy number one. And the walls start to go up, and like I said, it's tough. So my job is like getting those people back on track, or ideally stopping them before they even get to that point.
Yeah, and it's funny. I've heard phrases, like that, like, no one wants to be the D student, no one wants to be the C student. So a lot of times you just may not have the environment or the tools in order to be, successful. And everybody wants to be successful. Everybody wants to quote unquote win, so to speak. So I love that you have that knowledge, obviously, but you also empower people and to be able to do that. So I wanted to hear a little bit more on how you do that. Could you take us through a little bit more on the different ways that happens, and a little bit more about your podcast and your book as well too?
Oh, yeah, sure. So I really do a couple of things in my business, Gresh. Two main things. I'm an executive leadership coach. So I work with folks to help them build their leadership skills, a lot of times in executive positions. Not entirely, but a lot of my clients are in executive positions, and I help them do the things we just talked about, right? I help them make work fun again. And it's
Mhm.
fun when you're generating results and your team is happy. Like, that's where we want to get to. So if they're not there, we work to getting them towards there. And the second thing I do is more on an organization level, and that's when we come in and do a culture change. And that's when an organization just might sense this isn't working the way it is. And we've tried a couple things and that's not working either. We want to make this a better experience. We want to be more productive. And that's where we come in and sort of take a holistic look at the organization and we find out the truth about what it's really like to work there.
Mm.
Usually, when I come in, there is a disconnect between perceptions and reality, or I shouldn't say perception and reality. There's a disconnect between perceptions between the leadership team and the people that work there. And like you wouldn't think you need an outsider to come in to bridge that gap, but sometimes you do.
Yeah.
And my job comes in to bridge that gap and get everybody talking and facilitate movement towards a better future. So those are really the two things that I do.
I absolutely love and appreciate that, and I think you're absolutely right. I feel like, and I don't know if you've experienced this when you know speak with your clients, that when you're sometimes too close to it, or maybe don't even want to accept that to some degree, you know, sometimes the most painful thing you can do is hold up a mirror and look at it, you know, exactly for what it is. And I think a lot of times having somebody that has expertise, one, but also has the is not so close to it, it allows you that opportunity to do better and to improve and make those changes.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the sayings I like to use with my clients is we're not sure who discovered water, but we're sure it wasn't a fish. Because when that is your world, it is really hard to be objective about it. And we could go into a whole other reason, a lot of reasons why that's really difficult to be objective. But I mean, we all have ego, right? We
Mhm.
all have a sense of pride in what we've done. Nobody wants to admit they've quote unquote failed or not created as healthy of a culture as they could have. So it's tough for anybody to be objective about that. So that's where I come in. And part of it is not only creating that conversation, but presenting it in a way where it can be easily accepted by both sides.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's some of what you cover in your podcast and your book as well, too.
That's right. Yeah. And so my podcast is called Lead with Impact. You asked about that. That
Mhm.
started off talking about leadership, and I have been fortunate and blessed to have a number of great leaders on there. But we talk about a bunch of other things too. It's a fun show.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I definitely appreciate that. And get trying to get, you know, the tools that help people, you know, be successful is so important. And I think that, as you said, it's kind of a balance beam, you know, with, you know, the ego, because you want to make sure you have enough ego to think that you can take on the challenge and make things better. But at the same time, you kind of have to take a step back and also understand that maybe we don't know everything and we need to ask for help and we need to bring in experts or listen to podcasts or listen, write books, because that's going to allow us to be even better at what it is that we do.
Well, Gresh, ego and humility are not mutually exclusive.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
You can have a healthy ego and believe in yourself. And if you're going to be the CEO of a company, you better have that, right? You
Exactly.
better have a little self confidence and a little bit of resolve because
Yeah.
it will be tested, as you and I know. And I'm sure many guests have talked about on this show. But you need a little humility too,
Hmm.
right? You need to be able to say, maybe I'm not the expert on everything.
Yeah.
And maybe my view of the world isn't the same view that everybody else has.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that's why we bring in people that know so much better than we do and have them in the rooms. And so I wanted to ask you for what I call your secret sauce. And this could be for yourself personally or your business or a combination of both. But what do you feel kind of sets you apart and makes you unique?
Well, as far as my business, a couple things I'll say. If we want to like get into the business sense of it, I specialize in financial services companies. It's really comes naturally to me. That's like the environment. I was the fish in that environment, right? I was born in that environment professionally. So I understand how that world works. I understand some of the universal cultural challenges. Um, I like working with tech. That's been a sort of a new one for me, but a lot of leadership challenges in that industry. So those are two, like, if you're to talk about how my business is different, two ways I focus. Um, I have a model of influential leadership. Like, again, not to balance between ego and humility. If people tell me how I'm different, I like to say, well, if you want to be an influential leader, like, I literally wrote the book. Here it is. You determine if this is good for you or not. But I'm the guy who wrote this, and this
Right.
is what I believe. And if your beliefs align, we might be a good fit. But then lastly, I'll say this, and I'll do respect to that question, um, because I know it's a typical business question and a valuable business question, but I find in my line of work, consulting and coaching, not so beneficial for me to say I'm better than the next guy as it is to say I can get you results,
Mm.
right? Maybe Gresh is great too. I don't know, right? But I know if you work with me, I can get you results, and I won't promise that unless I know I can do it. And so when there's a philosophical alignment, I think I become the perfect guy for people.
Yeah, absolutely. You kind of can see your beliefs and the things that you want to have happen, within sometimes the things that we're hoping to do. And sometimes I feel like, and I don't know if you find this with your clients, where there just feels like there's a gap. You kind of understand it, that connects with you, but for whatever reason, it's not happening. That's a lot of times when you want to have, someone like yourself come in and help to make sure that that actually happens and you get those results.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why, that's why the alignment is so important for me, especially the work I do. I'm not handing people a physical product. Like you're not buying a shovel, you go shovel snow with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
There has to be like psychological and philosophical alignment for it to work. Like, and so it goes back to the answer of your question. When we have that, like when we see the world the same way, or you're at least willing to adjust a little bit because you know you need to adjust, then we can make great things happen. And then if you don't see the world that way, there's probably somebody else that would be great for you.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense, and I think that it takes two to tango, as they say. Not quite as popular a saying, but definitely something that probably resonates. Where you definitely need to have that. I don't know, we say buy-in or understanding or respect, maybe even to make sure that you start to see those results that you want to have.
Yeah, absolutely. So are you saying a lot of people aren't tangoing anymore?
No, I don't think so. We'll see that. Maybe virtually if they're doing it on Zoom, possibly.
Respond to this podcast and let Gresh know whether or not there's still tango people out there.
Exactly. To let me know if you're out there, raise your hand in the back. But I wanted to switch gears a little bit and I wanted to ask you for what I call a CEO hack. So this could be like an Apple book or a habit that you have, but what's something that makes you more effective and efficient?
Well, can I give you two?
Absolutely go for it.
Um, First, when I talk to the people I talk to, CEOs, I would also throw in business owners here, especially small business owners. Time is the thing, right? Is everybody tells me, I want to do this, I want to do that, but it's time. And it's real, everybody's busy. So, one of the things I use with my clients is a step process. In other words, if you're deciding to choose between two things, run it through the step process. In other words, if I have a choice between talking to a prospect or working on the logo, like for each of those things, how many steps are they away from success? And really be objective about that, because if I'm talking to a prospect, that may only put me one step away from success, right? Prospect likes me, we sign a contract. If I'm working on a logo, I might be 10 steps away from success. I make a logo, I work with a designer, I throw it on my website, somebody sees it, they decide maybe they like it, they email me, I email them back. I think really successful people, especially the CEOs, have to balance that. And I'm not here to say you just always want to work on short term things, but it is really beneficial to be conscious about when you're working on a project, when you're working on a task, to determine, am I working on enough short term things that are going to get me wins in the near future? And if you're not, that can be really dangerous. It can also be dangerous, by the way, to always live in the moment, because then you find yourself at the end of the year, at the end of the decade, saying, we never got that done. So when I work with people, it's a real balance in the short term and the long term things we're working on. But I find that step exercise to be helpful in at least gaining some objective clarity about how we're spending our time.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And I think that there's so much, value in being able to do that. Cause I think, we all have the same, amount of hours, so to speak. So it's just a matter of how you prioritize certain things. And I think it can be sometimes difficult to figure out, what are the priorities, what things should you be doing, or even just get an idea and be honest, as we talked about that mirror, about if you are just doing short term things, or if you're just doing long-term things, be honest about that. So I love that kind of framework and that step process to help people to do that.
Yeah, I thank you. I found it to be helpful for myself and the people I work with. One more thing, if I could throw out a really helpful book. I was fortunate over this past year to meet through my podcast and then thankfully to become friends with an author by the name of Bob Berg. I don't know if you know Bob, but he
I
wrote a
haven't.
book. He wrote a book called The Go Giver,
Oh, yes.
one of the top 10 business books ever.
Hmm.
And that book changed my life. It was given to me by a colleague and really changed the way I do everything. So if there's an entrepreneur, a CEO out there who like believes in the people side of business and wants to lean into it and leverage it more, go read Bob's book because it is amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I hadn't, realized who the author was, but definitely that is a great book. I think I have it on Audible. And I
Yeah.
think especially if you are a giver, you're trying to figure out how to manage that as much as possible is so huge because you want to take who you are and bring yourself into everything that you do.
Yeah, and one of the lessons I learned, and it's more complex than it sounds.
Mhm.
At first, I really, between you and me, I hesitated to read it because I thought the concept was so simple: give more, right?
Mhm.
But really, he does a great job of breaking it down into like making you look at it in a different way and apply it. So he'd probably be happy I'm spending my interview prep talking about his book, but it's a great book. So if anybody likes that sort of thing, I would definitely recommend it. And the thing is, give it that philosophy is a business model. Like it's not
Mhm.
just be nice for the sake of being nice, which I believe in, but it's a profitable business model.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it resonates, and there's loads of successful people that are able to do that. So I'm sure he'll have the Go Giver will appreciate you dropping the Go Giver as a great hack. So I wanted to ask you for what I call now as CEO Nugget. So this could be a word of wisdom or piece of advice. It might be something you would tell a client, or if you hopped into a time machine, you might tell your younger business self.
Yeah. One that's been resonating with a lot of people lately, Gresh, is the distinction between what I call the balcony and the dance floor for
Mhm.
leaders. Um, I have to say, first of all, I did not come up with this. This was, I think, Ron Heifetz of Harvard is the guy who first coined this phrase, but it's really helpful. I write about it in my book a little bit. And the balcony and the dance floor, basically, for leaders, is a way for them to think about what mindset they are in when they're leading. So the balcony, and this is not so different than what we talked about with time, the balcony is when you're super objective about things, right? The balcony is the reserved observer, right? You're on the balcony, there's a dance happening below you, but you are up high, you are able to observe who's dancing slow, who's dancing fast, who's happy, who's not, who's a little tipsy, who isn't, right? You're seeing it
Mhm.
all from the balcony, very objectively. And as leaders, you need to do that, right? There's a amount of time where you need to separate yourself emotionally from what's going on. Try not to be the fish in the water, right?
Mhm.
And stand back and say objectively what's happening here. When I remove my ego, when I remove my emotions, how are we doing? That's not the balcony. But there are times when a leader needs to be on the dance floor, right? Where they need to say, I'm not going to be objective right now. I'm not going to be distant. I'm going to get in there and mix it up, right? I'm going there shoulder to shoulder with my people. I'm going to find out what they're feeling. I want to find out what they're thinking. Like, I want to find out what it's like dealing with our customers. I want to find out what processes are driving them nuts because they don't work, but we don't take them out of the manual, right?
Mhm.
And getting down there and really mixing it up. So my tip would be for leaders to start thinking about that. And in their day to day, like, are you spending time in both worlds? Because when leaders are struggling and they come to me, many times there's a real imbalance there. They're either not taking enough time to be remote observers and being strategic, or they're there all the time and they've put up a wall between themselves and their team, and they become detached from reality that way.
Nice. I absolutely love that. And I love because the tango reference goes right with that because you can
That's
be on
right.
the dance floor and you can
It
definitely
all comes back.
exactly. But I think it really, resonates with, me and leaders because you want to make sure that you're being honest about where you're at, as we kind of talked about, before, in this interview, is that, people sometimes don't realize that they are in the balcony and they have kind of distanced themselves from their team and they're not as dialed into what's happening. Or sometimes people are completely on the dance floor and they're not looking and seeing what is happening because they're so close to it. And I think having that balance and understanding when is the right time to be on the dance floor or in the balcony is so huge.
Yeah. And the first step for all of this, Gresh, is self awareness.
Mm,
Right? Like you talked about at the very beginning, it's the ability to be objective.
yeah.
I always go back to Jack Nicholson and A Few Good Men. Can you handle the truth? Like the
Mm,
answer to that question defines all of this. Because until you can say yes, like none of this matters,
yeah.
right? Until you can have that objectivity to say, yeah, maybe I've been successful to a point, but it could be better.
Yeah.
Or maybe I'm struggling and I just don't want to admit it to myself or anybody else, but I know it can be better. Like when we get to that point and are ready to objectively analyze what's going on, that's when the magic starts to happen.
Exactly. That's when you start to take those actions towards that. Hopefully, if you have answered that honestly, so to speak.
And the good news, probably to me right now, for you and me, is if somebody's listening to this, there's a good chance they're the kind of people who take action.
Exactly. Yeah, always the people that would definitely want to level up, and now knowing that there is an opportunity to do that and how exactly to make that happen is so huge. And so I wanted to ask you now my absolute favorite question, which is the definition of what it means to be a CEO. And we're hoping to have different quote unquote CEOs on the show. So Brian, what does being a CEO mean to you?
I'm going to give you a an answer that may seem overly sentimental, so I hope not. I'm a businessman, right? I tell people in business, like I believe in capitalism and business and all of that.
Hmm.
But to me, it means you get to help more people. I
Hmm.
mean, to be a CEO means we talked about that ripple effect earlier. Like when
Hmm.
you are a CEO, you have the ability to be an amazing ripple effect for everyone on your team, for all of your customers, for their families. Like again, if you start mentally going through the ripples, it
Hmm.
goes a long way. And like the more you do that, to me, the more fulfilling this whole thing is.
Yeah, I absolutely love that and that visual, especially too, because you have so much impact in the actions that you take, sometimes in the actions that you don't take, sometimes when you're on the dance floor and sometimes when you're in, the balcony. And once you start to understand that, I think it helps us to be more, I guess, aware of the actions that we're taking because it doesn't just impact us, it impacts so many people around us.
Yeah, I mean, think of you, Gresh. I don't put you
Hmm.
on the spot, but you're
Hmm.
you're working hard. You're
Hmm.
talking to all sorts of people. You
Hmm.
could be, hanging out on the beach somewhere or watching Netflix, right? But you're in the grind, right? And
Hmm.
people, by the way, if you're not listening, you don't know. It is hard to do a podcast. Like it is hard. It sounds easy. It sounds like you just go to a microphone and talk. It is hard. There's a lot of work. Gresh is working hard, right? But you don't know who's going to listen to one of these episodes that you did and go out and make a change to their life that you may
Hmm.
probably will never know about, but
Yeah.
it's going to happen. I'm sure it has happened. So like, again, not to be too sentimental about this whole thing, but to me, that's what it's all about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, especially as leaders, I appreciate that, Brian, because it is not an easy thing as a fellow podcaster, to create and publish podcasts. But I think that so many times you don't see those things or you don't hear those things. But I think that that's why it's so important to kind of be dialed into to your mission, to have that vision, because you're going to do it because you hope that maybe it is making some type of impact or it is making some type of, you know, however we define success, and you're hoping that with every action, every podcast, every introduction, you're hoping to get closer and closer to that.
Yeah. So to me, again, that's what it's all about. Is for me, I like to think of that multiplying. For me, like not only am I making those ripples, I'm helping other people make them.
Yeah.
So that's what it's all about.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Brian, truly appreciate that definition. I appreciate your time even more. What I wanted to do is pass you the mic, so to speak, to just see if there's anything additional you can let our readers and listeners know. And of course, how best they can subscribe to your podcast and get a copy of your book.
Um, sure. I nothing else other than to say if you're out there working hard, you're doing a good job. This is not easy for anybody. If you're running a business, it is not easy for anybody. If you're looking for ways to get better, I would just encourage you to take a really objective look at your team, their culture. Like, are people smiling all day? Are they achieving what they could be achieving, or is it starting to look like a grind? And um, your skills as a leader. Is there room for improvement? If there are, I would submit that it can have a high return on investment to do that, whether it's with myself or somebody else, or just even uh, diving into it yourself. There's a lot of that can come from that. I can be found at brianrollo.com. Easiest way to get my book is to go there. There's a menu link for book and take you to it. And yeah, that'd be great. And also, there's a freebie if you want to just get the overview. I have a freebie there, which is sort of like the 10 habits condensed. You won't get like all the meat and the extra stuff from the book, but if you just like want to know the 10 habits and the tips, that's for free on the front page of my website.
Nice. I definitely appreciate that, Brian. No meat and potatoes, but still definitely a value. So I appreciate you providing that. And then as we, learn more about that, you can definitely get your meat and potatoes with the book. So definitely appreciate that, Brian. We will have the links and information in the show notes. And I hope you have a phenomenal rest of the day.
Yeah, you too.